What are the best and worst matchups for your quarterbacks and running backs in Week 18 for fantasy football? It's time for the starts and advice, rankings, and recommendations here as we begin another matchup Wednesday on Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for SportingNews.com. I have the Week 18 picks against the spread. It is going on as usual here for now. And we also have our start sit column, The Decider, up as well as SportingNews.com, as well as we'll have sleeper and bust picks to look at for the games coming up this weekend. Some on Saturday, too. We have the Chiefs and Raiders. Then we have the AFC South title game, Titans and Jaguars. Then the rest of the games will fall there on Sunday, and we're still figuring out all the schedule here, but it looks like we're going to have a full slate, all division games as usual here, so we'll break that down for you. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, there's some tougher things to navigate this week with some teams potentially resting players based on their playoff status or non-playoff status, so we'll get into that. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We're free and available to you on all platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise? And this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Listeners Locked On Fantasy Football get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On. That's Locked On in all caps when playing inside the game. All right, we will get into our quarterback rankings of the week here, and we do have a couple things we need to consider, and we'll tell you that as we go along, as we look at these quarterbacks that we want to play. Patrick Mahomes playing for the number one seed in the AFC. They play the Raiders on Saturday night or Saturday afternoon. That is a really good spot. Obviously, the Raiders defense is not very good. They just got into a shootout with the 49ers last week. So Mahomes definitely is the number one here. He's motivated. He's looking for some yardage record as well. So Mahomes clearly is the number one this week. Number two, Jalen Hurts. All reports are that he's going to play against the Giants. So we see the big spread. Giants probably resting players on the other side. So Hurts should get some defensive key players out for the game for New York. And coming back, the Eagles need this game badly to just take care of the NFC East and home field advantage throughout the playoffs. So this is pretty big here. So Mahomes and Hurts, the two quarterbacks for the number one teams, are really going to be going after it this week. Josh Allen and Joe Burrow, tough situation for them emotionally. How do they rebound? Well, there's also potential for these guys to rest their players, the Bills and Bengals, and might be the smart thing to do here with the emotional and physical toll this week has taken on them. So we'll watch that. But there's a scenario where the Chiefs can lock up home field advantage. The Bills would be in the number 2 spot, and the Ravens are in the the Bengals would be in the number 3 spot, having already won the division over the Ravens. So interesting fallout there from the game not being resumed, and that's just something that everyone's going to adjust to overall. And the players are doing it as best they can. So Allen and Burrow, especially if there's no chance to get that number one seed, there's going to be a good chance they rest these players, because keep in mind, this would also work as their bye and a chance to stay healthy ahead of playing next week in the playoffs. So things to worry about there when you're looking at these teams, but I think that would be a right call to make for those teams, given how this week has been really tough on them. So I would be surprised. So Allen and Burrow, again, I want to see those guys preserved as well for the playoffs from a reality perspective, and I just want their mental headspace to be right as well. So again, Allen Burrow may not be on the table this week. You might have to look at the backups here in those situations. And not too bad here with Case Keenum and Brandon Allen. So some things to look at there with Allen and Burrow this week. Justin Herbert, you're looking at number 5. They're going to keep playing well. The Chargers want to keep up that momentum. They're not going to get rest next week as a wild card team. So I think it's in their best interest to play their guys and try to stay ahead of the Ravens in that seeding scenario so they can be number 5 and they'll play the AFC South winner. So that's what I would expect from the Chargers with Herbert. Dak Prescott and the Cowboys will be playing for that number 1 in the same window as the Eagles and trying to win that division should the Giants pull the upset here. So I have them at number 6 this week. The Commanders, you got to pass on them. It's tough to run on them. Their secondary is pretty weak. You look at Trevor Lawrence in that Saturday night, again, de facto AFC South championship game against the Titans. It's a really good matchup. You have to pass on the Titans. Lawrence didn't do all that much last week. It was the Travis Etienne Jr., JaMychal Hasty show on the ground, so not a lot of passing. They were able to pull Lawrence for C.J. Beathard in that blowout. So this week, I think he's going to have to do a little bit more and do it mostly through the air. And Aaron Rodgers is going to be motivated as well on Sunday night. He can get the Packers in the playoffs, finish that running the table against the Lions in Lambeau Field. So I think he'll play well. He didn't get the 2 scores last week, but again, I thought he played pretty well. It's just the Packers really destroyed the Vikings, and there wasn't much resistance from Kirk Cousins there, and that really helped the Packers kind of pull away in that game. It was more of a running and defense-oriented performance for Green Bay, and they didn't need a lot of Rodgers. So that can happen in games, and we've seen that with the Vikings. It's either a close game and teams going back and forth scoring, or the Vikings get blown out, and that's what we saw. With the Packers, I think Lions will be a little bit more competitive this week. But Rodgers is going to be motivated here to put this game away early and take it out of reach for Jared Goff and the Lions. All right, there you have a look at your quarterback rankings there for the week. These are the quarterbacks that we feel the best about. And again, we'll watch what happens with Allen and Burrow, and that could really hinge on what happens there on Saturday if the Raiders play spoiler against the Chiefs, and things could change for sure in those situations, but something to monitor there. We told you at the top, this episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM, and I'm really geeked out about them being our sponsor here on the show. It's an exciting new mobile game. Ever dreamed of becoming NFL GM and managing your football franchise where your dream can come true? And this game is definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the season, and lead your team to glory. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, making draft picks, navigating your franchise through free agency and drafts, and all the ups and downs of a regular season. It's all this in a challenging, realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. And really, I've gotten into it, downloaded the app. It's a lot of fun to play. You can also build a league and to battle your friends just like you would in fantasy football. And it's been fun trying to figure out the Locked On NFL hosts, how well they can play this game. It's new to all of us, but we're enjoying it and getting into it. So, and you can also talk a little trash about your Ultimate Football GM teams as well. So, extension of fantasy football in a different way here for you. And really, you can do the same with your friends there and really have fun with Ultimate Football GM. Locked On Fantasy Football listeners can get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using their promo code Locked On, all caps, in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps, so make sure you check it out today. Download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, we'll continue the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football in a moment. But first, thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Subscribe to the Locked On NFL podcast to get daily conversation with the biggest NFL stories, latest updates right now on Damar Hamlin, and getting some positive news there. So check that show out for the updates, plus in-depth analysis on the biggest games with NFL key predictions every Friday. And Monday, local insiders cover the weekend with game-to-game episodes. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's look at the quarterbacks now that are on the start-sit question marks here of the week. Kirk Cousins, after last week, you're going to be a little bit maybe cautious about playing him, but they are playing the Bears this week. The Vikings may rest players a little bit, but I think they need to tune up after they got demolished against Green Bay and couldn't do anything offensively. So Kirk Cousins gets the Bears defense that's not stopping much of anything. We've seen that in several weeks. This could turn into a big running fest with Dalvin Cook and Alexander Madison, like we've seen happen to the Bills and Lions. But Cousins can still get his numbers before he gets out of the game. And you also have a motivated Justin Jefferson to try to post to bigger numbers after the one catch performance against the Packers last week. Geno Smith, look, it's tough. Geno seems to come through the tougher spots. I think in general, Geno's better at home, and he gets the Rams at home this week. He wasn't as effective on the road 2 weeks ago against the Chiefs, but pretty good against a tough Jets defense with a couple of touchdowns, a little revenge game for him in week 17. So at home against the Rams, Geno should be comfortable and get the 215-2 that we can expect. Again, not a very high ceiling with Geno Smith, but he's at high floor all season long. That's made him a QB1 in fantasy. Justin Fields, there's some thought to the Bears resting him. He got banged up, sacked a lot last week, and didn't look right, and struggled a little bit against the Lions. But I would expect him to play. He's a competitor. He wants to be out there against the Vikings defense. If he's there, he's definitely in your lineups. Last week was a struggle passing, but he ran wild again to give him a high floor in fantasy. So Fields is out there. He's definitely a QB1 for your team. Again, he still produces even when he's off, and that's what we saw in Detroit. Now, Tom Brady, looking at him, again, we could see him only for a half, but that could be enough to put up a couple touchdowns against the Falcons. Here, I do like the Buccaneers maybe getting a tune-up. They don't have a lot of plans to rest their key players. I think they probably would at running back, and they've got some banged-up defensive players. That's where you'll see it. But I think Brady will get a tune-up. He'll want to play a little bit, and he can do enough against the Falcons in a shorter period of time, whether it's a half or 3 quarters there in that game. Brock Purdy keeps it going here against the Cardinals at home. They still have shot the 49ers to play for something here. We'll see how it plays out, but really looking at the 49ers wanting to stay ahead of the Vikings for sure and have that number 2 seed going into the playoffs. Jared Stidham, you're looking at him streaming potential. Last week, he really came through with 3 touchdowns, interceptions. He played like Derek Carr might have in maybe a better matchup, but he came through in the 49ers matchup. I get it, he had the 2 interceptions, but the daily game script could happen again, even if there's mistakes against the Chiefs at home, back at home again this week. That makes it appealing. Mike White on the road against the Dolphins. I think he'll rebound here. The Dolphins defense maybe without Xavier Howard again. His ribs should feel a little bit better. The weapons are just too good, so you can look at Mike White this week. They're in fantasy. And if you're going deeper, Kenny Pickett this week, I do like Pickett to get the job done against the Browns. He hasn't had a multiple touchdown game since his first appearance there against the Jets, but I think he'll get it done this week. I think you'll see 2. Somehow, I think you'll maybe see Deontay Johnson get the end zone, which would be terrific. Pat Freiermuth is someone we can look at as well as the running back. So I think Kenny Pickett's going to have a nice game against the Browns and deliver as a deep streamer this week for you in fantasy football. Now let's go to the guys that I don't want to trust this week. Jared Goff at the Packers. It's outside. He's not the same quarterback outside in the cold, away from the domes. So Jared Goff, I mean, that trend has stayed true all season long. I don't think it changes here, especially after the Packers' fine defensive performance against the Vikings last week. You have Deshaun Watson playing the Steelers. I'm not going to trust him against that Steelers defense starting to play really well with T.J. Watt, Minka Fitzpatrick and company. You have Russell Wilson there. I'm not going to trust him. He's not playing the Chiefs this week. Those have been his good fantasy games of late, but the Chargers defense playing at a really high level, so I'm not going there. Mac Jones stays on your bench after a decent performance against the Dolphins last week as a streamer with 2 touchdowns. Not going to happen in Buffalo this week against that defense in tougher conditions. Tyler Huntley, we've tried, but it hasn't happened here with the plug-and-play value that we saw last year for Lamar Jackson. I would think they would be careful of Lamar Jackson with the division no longer the line. They need to get him healthy for that first round of the playoffs. Carson Wentz, not going to trust him at all. This matchup against the Cowboys after a rough outing against the Browns. Baker Mayfield might be appealing as a streamer based on the numbers, but not going to do it. Mike White was not very good last week, and Baker's basically had 1.5 good games here for his new team in Los Angeles. And Andy Dalton, again, might be tempting. The Panthers did give up the 400-yard and the 3 touchdown game to Tom Brady, but I'm not trusting Andy Dalton. I think they stay grounded with Alvin Kamara and Tyreek Hill there in New Orleans to try to beat the Panthers this week. All right, it is time to look now at the running backs, and we'll look at the rankings first. We'll go down the players. Christian McCaffrey, no brainer. Number one, he's battling through a bit of a quad issue. He's day to day. He should play here, and they'll be a little bit careful with him. The touches may be scaled back after he had 25 last week, but matchup against the Cardinals is too good. Austin Eckler keeps rolling. They'll probably be careful about him putting a little Joshua Kelly in running situations, but I still like him against the Broncos this week. Derrick Henry, well rested from the game against the Cowboys, where he sat out with a hip injury. They were very careful with that. He could have played if it was important. This week, he gets the Jaguars, and he's had a great history against the Jaguars, and he's going to be the ticket to potentially winning this division with Joshua Dobbs at quarterback. Dalvin Cook, who mentioned the Bears, is getting gashed by running backs left and right, 2 per game. Dalvin Cook should have a big bounce back game there. Najee Harris has been carrying the Steelers offense. He'll play well to help Kenny Pickett against the Browns at home. Josh Jacobs also in a good spot. He came through in a tough matchup against the 49ers last week. Good matchup this week against the Chiefs to get involved in the pass game. Kenneth Walker, yeah, he's up at number 7. He's going to run on the Rams. Let's get that touchdown, shall we? He's been running for easy 100 yards. Let's get that touchdown this week. Nick Chubb needs that touchdown. He got 100 yards last week in a tough matchup there against the Commanders. So the Steelers, it can be tough, but Chubb is the lifeblood of that Browns offense. Travis Etienne Jr., tough matchup against the Titans, but he's played really well. He's got the speed in the open field. They can also use him a little bit more in the passing game. So Travis Etienne comes in at number 9. Cam Akers blew up against Seattle the first time, has really run well in the past several weeks here. So he's an RB1 this week. Aaron Jones coming off a 111-yard rushing performance against the Vikings. A great spot at home against the Lions. And Joe Mixon last. They could be careful with Mixon, so watch that. They might pivot to Samaje Perine, but either back has some value there, especially the Ravens. Wrestling players with their banged up front. Alvin Kamara comes in pretty high against the Panthers. The Panthers contained the Buccaneers duo, but the negative game script happened. Kamara is what the Saints like to do quite a bit, so that helps. Tony Pollard and Ezekiel Elliott. Pollard, we'll see if he can return. They might be careful with him here. It is not the easiest matchup against the Commanders, but Elliott, we didn't like the matchup last week. It wasn't very productive overall, but he salvaged his day with a touchdown there against the Titans. So this is another tough matchup for Elliott. You need the touchdown to come through. We'll see about Pollard's playing status this week. Jerick McKinnon keeps it going with Isaiah Pacheco in that great matchup against the Raiders. They've been very productive. Ramondre Stevenson hasn't done much the last 2 weeks, but he still is the lead back. They get the Bills this week. He was okay in the first meeting. DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams, another combo you can look at in that fine matchup there against the Packers. Jamal Williams, a little bit revenge game for the former Packer, and Swift running well, and the Packers most vulnerable against the run. And you have Tyler Algier. He's now locked in as a starter for sure against the Buccaneers, who will be resting some players up front in their defense. So those are the running backs there, almost getting into all the RB2s in a 12-team league that you would look at to start in fantasy football here in week 18. And we will, don't worry, get into DFS and the specific picks there based on price points on Friday when we get into that. Here, I got to tell you that this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is also brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. And with LinkedIn, you're going to get the right hires the way you want them for your small business. A small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on team members you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experience to help you achieve those spots and goals the way you want them. LinkedIn Jobs help you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools. They go beyond resume data by using insights from your job post, company, and their 875 million member profiles to put your post in front of the most qualified candidates. Identify the most qualified candidates on LinkedIn Jobs and connect them fast and for free. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy to screen and rate applicants based on your job qualifications all in one platform. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your jobs for free. Terms and conditions do apply. All right, it is time to close the show here on Locked On Fantasy Football. We'll look at the running back starts and sits here of the week. A.J. Dillon was quiet last week against the Vikings, but should rebound and get in on the act with Aaron Jones this week against the Lions. So do like A.J. Dillon there. Miles Sanders should rebound. The Giants, again, resting some players. They need to run with him. The Eagles will be motivated to win. I think Sanders will perform well with the threat of Jalen Hurts running, also returning to the Eagles. Dave Montgomery, you got to stick with him. Khalil Herbert is also a play in deeper leagues here as a flex. Vikings run defense has been pretty bad. They could also be resting players in a key spot in the game. So don't be surprised about that. But Montgomery and Herbert's having a great matchup. So did Zach Moss and Deion Jackson. The Colts don't have much to play for, but they get the Texans run defense at home. Zach Moss in particular getting a key volume in the running game. Jackson being more of a change of pace, but I would expect the Colts stay very grounded this week with Sam Ellinger starting at quarterback. There's been some separation with the former 49ers backs in Miami. Raheem Mostert has looked better in recent weeks. He's also been the more effective pass catcher as they needed him. Then could have Skylar Thompson starting at quarterback this week. It could be at least Teddy Bridgewater again. That would help Mostert, but it would really lean on the run. The Jets have been run on of late here with power and speed. We've seen that the past couple of weeks with Travis Etienne and Kevin Walker, so that bodes well for Mostert's performance against the Jets. Dr. Foreman and Chuba Hubbard, the Saints run defense, and we know it isn't the same. They got pounded a little bit last week, so I do like the Saints as a good matchup here for Foreman and Hubbard to stay active. Hubbard, maybe the negative game script would help him with the receiving, but Foreman does definitely lead power back here. Now, we didn't mention Saquon Barkley in the rankings. I don't think he's going to play. I don't think there's any reason the Giants should expose an older, injury-riddled running back from the past in this one. So Matt Breida ran pretty well behind Daniel Jones against the Colts last week, so I do think he'll get the decent volume here against the Eagles with a little bit of Gary Brightwell thrown in there. Royce Freeman also steps in a great matchup. The Colts have really become very loose against the run of late. So Freeman, I do like this week to do something with that volume. So Moss and Freeman in the same game. They've hinted at doing something in fantasy, but I think they can put it together this week, and there's a good chance both of them score in this game. So those are the running backs that I would play this week. Brian Robinson Jr. is one I wouldn't. The Cowboys' run defense is pretty tough. He was really disappointing last week with those 24 carries, only 87 yards against a very weak Browns run defense. So I'm not going to play Robinson there against the Cowboys if I can avoid it. The Commanders' offense is looking terrible right now. Leonard Fournette, Rachaad White. They do have some options here with Keyshawn Vaughn, Giovanni Bernard. So they'll probably be careful with both these guys. I think you'd see more of Vaughn than anyone else here. A little bit of Bernard, maybe for tune-up, but Bernard has also been playing on special teams. So I think Vaughn could definitely have a load here this week. I just wouldn't trust it here because, again, the regulars for the Bucs are probably not going to be there around to help and support the running game. James Conner, I'm not going to trust Conner, especially with the thigh injury. He may not play. Then you get a messy committee of Corey Clement and Keontae Ingram in that game against the 49ers. Latavius Murray, not going to trust him. He's a little bit banged up. You got Chase Edmonds as well in the mix, getting a little bit more run, and the Chargers have been tightening up against the run of late. So not going there. J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, I'm not sure what the usage is going to be, but the Bengals can be tough on the run. That's one of their calling cards on defense. So not going to trust how they split up that workload in that matchup. Devin Singletary and James Cook also could be seeing limited work there for that matchup. You could see a lot of Naeem Hines against the Patriots. Just depends what happens to the Chiefs there against the Raiders. So I just don't like that matchup. The Patriots have been pretty good against the run. Cordarrelle Patterson, I know he's been getting some work and scoring behind Algier, but it's the Algier lead here. The Patterson probably playing his last game with Atlanta. And Zonovan Knight, not going to go there, or Ty Johnson or Michael Carter. We've seen this backup backfield. Just no one can be consistent and reliable there without Breece Hall. So not going to play any of them against the Dolphins. Damian Harris, not going to trust him either. If I'm a little bit worried about Stevenson as lead back, Harris not doing much there in complement there. So not going to trust Harris behind Ramondre Stevenson for sure this week. So there you have it. There's a breakdown of your top running back plays, and then your running back plays you'd like to avoid here in week number 18. So we took care of quarterbacks, we took care of running backs. We will look at wide receivers, tight ends, and streaming defenses there on Matchup Thursday for you tomorrow as we break it down here for the final week of the 2022 NFL regular season. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you the local insights you love to the national spotlight with daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories, including what's going on with Damar Hamlin and all the updates you need to know there. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this is Vinnie Iyer. We'll check you out tomorrow with wide receiver, tight end, and defense analysis on Matchup Thursday.